Hello, everybody. I'm Frank Gruber, the co-CEO of Established. I met our next guest, Rohit Bhargava, over a decade ago in Washington, D.C. We both were early bloggers in a time when social media was just getting going. And in fact, I remember our first, I think it might have been even the first time we met, was on a session together at the New Internet Conference. And it happened in like 2007, I believe. And it was a crazy conference talking about social media and how to blog and all that whatnot. And it included Rohit and myself and Gary Vee before anybody knew who Gary Vee was. And he's now, got at the time he had his Wine Library TV and now he has VaynerX and a bunch of other projects. And also Jeff Livingston, who's also digital pioneer, marketing pioneer, author, blogger, and a great photographer as well. So it's kind of a look back. But today Rohit is he's an innovator and marketing expert. He's the founder of Non-Obv company. He spent 15 years marketing strategy for Ogilvy and Leo Burnett. He is a Wall Street Journal best-selling author of 6 different books. So wow, he's been busy. And also he teaches innovation and marketing at Georgetown University. His most recent book is called Non-Obv Megatrends. It's the culmination of 9 other years of Non-Obv books. So pretty impressive. He's been pumping out these books and his process is amazing. I'm really excited to talk to him. In his books, I've even noted that he's talked about some of our Startup of the Year companies. Not from this year, but back in 2015, our Startup of the Year winner was Blendor, and Blendor appears in the book as well as a few others. So really excited to be here today and talking to Rohit. I'll have him join here in 1 second, but before we do, I want to make sure everyone that's following along is out there and joining the conversation on Twitter. If you use the hashtag Startup of Year and Non-Obv as 2 separate hashtags, Startup of Year and Non-Obv, we'll be giving away some books to our favorite tweets from the conversation. So little bonus for paying attention and sharing your thoughts. So welcome, Rohit. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I always love talking with you.
Yeah, definitely. So let's dive right in because I know our time is tight today. Let's jump in. Can you share what is a non-obvious trend for all those listening?
Yeah, so we hear a lot about trends, and my inspiration 10 years ago when I started doing this annual trend report that then turned into an annual book, which eventually turned into Megatrends, was to try and do something non-obvious. I mean, that's literally the title. And the problem that I saw with so many different trend reports and predictions was that they were totally blatantly obvious, and they were just observing things that existed. Like somebody would write a trend report and they'd say the hottest trend of the new year is going to be drones. And you're like, dude, that's just like something that exists. Where's the actual trend? Where's the direction?
Right.
And so for me, like my definition of a trend, a non-obvious trend, is that it's a curated observation of the accelerating present. And so really what I try and teach people is like, how do you observe and understand the accelerating present?
So you touched on a couple of things there that brought my curiosity. How do you become a curator to do that? And why is that important for everyone watching?
Well, I think that what great curators do is 2 things. One is that they train their power of observation to be able to see what other people just walk past.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times people ask me, like, look, is there a certain type of person that does this better than anyone? And if you remember like that video, that social experiment video with the gorilla going in the middle when people are passing the basketball, a lot of, it's like super popular, right? Like people are passing the basketball, you tell them to count the number of times the basketball has been passed, and a guy in a gorilla suit walks through the middle and you don't see him because you're focused on the ball being passed.
Yep. Right.
And then when people say, oh, did you see the gorilla? Or if you know it, right, you see the gorilla. And like the question I ask people afterwards is, the people who see the gorilla, they're not just like natural gorilla noticers. Like they don't notice a gorilla better than anyone else, right? They just know what to look for. And to me, like that's what a curator also does. They pay attention, they observe. And then the second piece of it is they take lots of different things, they put them together and say, look, this is a bigger theme. This is a bigger message. And that's what curators in museums do, right? They choose artwork, they put it in an exhibit, and then they say, here's the theme of this artwork. And they don't put up everything. They have lots of stuff that's in storage. And so part of it is deciding what not to pay attention to. And that's the other part of curation.
Right. So I'm very interested in your process, and I know you've got a method that you do this. Can you share, like, how do you identify, first let's share the process and how you identify those non-obvious trends.
Yeah, my process, I call it the haystack method. And the reason why I do that is sort of to flip the cliche of looking for a needle in a haystack on its head. And so to me, the haystack method is all about gathering the hay. It's not about the needle, it's about the hay. And the hay is the information, is the stories. And the more time you spend, the more you can train yourself to pay attention to all of these stories and all of these different spaces and different industries and different verticals, the more you can put it together and say, this is what this is what it means. This is what the trend is. This is what the needle is. And you take your own needle and you stick it in the middle and you say, this is the meaning. And that's what this method is all about. It's about training yourself to pay attention to lots and lots of stuff, not just the stuff that social media serves up for you or the
Right.
stuff that people who agree with you share with you.
Mhm.
It intentionally goes and reads, it's about intentionally going and reading things or watching things you don't agree with. It's about intentionally getting outside of your own bubble. And it's really not that easy to do because we're just so surrounded by stuff that is delivered to us that you really have to try hard to break out of it.
That makes sense. And I think I read that you look at magazines, right? You try to to get out of that bubble because
Yeah.
there's algorithms literally keeping us in our bubble right now. So how you share some of the ways you get out?
Yeah, so I mean, everybody who's watching this is probably pretty savvy about how the internet works, right? So we all of us are
Mhm.
us tech savvy people, and I think we're all in this kind of family together of tech savvy people.
Mhm.
Understand that when we search, like when you search for something on Google or when I search for something on Google, we get different results.
Right.
First of all, there's a lot of people in the world who don't understand that. They think that what you see is what I see, and so they don't understand how you could believe something different than me because you're
Right.
reading the same thing. How can you be so stupid? And that's not actually the case. Like we see different media, and for me, magazines are a beautiful way to get outside of that algorithmic bias because the magazine that I pick up is the same one that you pick up. And not only that, but if I pick up a magazine that's not intended for me, so if I read Teen Vogue magazine, which is for 16-year-old girls, or I read Modern Farmer magazine, which is
I
for
love
modern
that one
farmers,
actually.
which I'm not,
No, but I love that magazine. It's a great magazine.
It is, and Monocle magazine, which is
Yep.
amazing for anybody who lives in the US because it's not about America, and
Right.
so much of what we hear here is just about what's happening in America. And so we
Right.
we create these bubbles and then we're reinforced with those bubbles because of social media. And print media is a great way to get out of that because it's not biased or tailored to who you are. There's no ads being served based on you having looked for that last set of dumbbells, and so it's like none of that stuff is tailored to you. It's the same, and
Right.
that's really, really important.
Definitely. Okay, so how do you identify, or actually, how do you know like if a trend is a trend versus a non-obvious trend? I guess you talked about a little bit, but I want to make sure people are spotting
Yeah.
these things, thinking, oh, I thought that was a trend, and they're trendsetters and all this stuff. Can you share a little bit more about how you do it and what the difference is?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things that I look for in order for something to be what I would call a non-obvious trend is it changing the way that we think or do business in terms of what we buy or sell
Mhm.
in multiple industries? So if it's just affecting the financial sector, for example, it's unlikely to be what I call a non-obvious trend.
Right.
If, however, it's affecting multiple industries, if it's affecting financial services, if it's affecting healthcare, if it's affecting retail, if it's affecting travel, and you find examples of the same thing across multiple sectors, then it could be something that in my method would elevate to call a trend.
Okay. More questions about non-obvious trends. Do new trends make old trends not true?
Sometimes, but what I tend to find more often is that an old trend, and look, I have a lot of experience with old trends
Right.
because
You got
every year I
nine
do
books.
this
Yeah. Yeah.
report. Yeah, I do this report. I have a new version of this book every year.
Right.
And up until Megatrends, which was the last edition, and we could definitely talk about why.
Yep.
But every year there's been 15 new trends.
Mhm.
And the Megatrends book did not do that. It had 10 what I called megatrends, and the megatrends each incorporate, like, yeah, there it is right
There
there.
it is. Mega trend.
And each one of those megatrends incorporate lots of the kind of old trends.
Right.
But what ends up happening over time is that a trend, the way I describe it, either continues to accelerate or it fades away. It was
Mm.
a temporary thing, and I'm pretty transparent about the fact that I have not gotten all of these trends completely right, and that they haven't lasted over time. In fact, at the back of that book, there's an appendix, a detailed appendix that gives a letter grade to every one of those past
Yeah.
trends, more than 100 of them,
Right.
in terms of whether they continued to accelerate over time or not. And so because I'm not afraid to say when I got things wrong, and it's not just based on me looking at it and saying, hey, I was wrong or I was right. It's based
Right.
on all of these workshops I've done, and before
Right.
the pandemic, all of these kind of keynotes, and in being in the room with people talking about these trends, and then being with them afterwards as we sort of explored them to say, hey, I don't think this one's actually continuing, at least not in the way that you wrote about it, right? And
Right.
so it's based on all of that feedback and this whole panel of kind of trend curators that I've built through the non-obvious, we call it the non-obvious nation. It's like our online community, right?
Right.
And the idea is that the more transparency we can put behind these, the more we can actually spotlight what does really matter.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about the book. I mean, I had it here. It's a great book. It's got 9 mega trends in the book, but obviously you've captured all those trends over the last 10 years.
Well, it's got 10, but I think one of the pages kind of mistakenly put 9 on the
does it?
list.
Okay.
So, yeah, but there's 10 total. There's 10
Okay,
total.
10 total. Okay.
Yep.
I just have a like for the number 9, I guess. So now you've got these 10 mega trends in the book. Can you share the top trends that kind of stood out the most? And actually, we should talk a little bit about this. This book came out in January, right?
Yes, it did.
2020, yep. January 2020, when the world was a little bit different.
Yeah.
And so you were playing, you were coming up with these mega trends way before that. How have they held up first? And then let's dive into the ones that you think are the most interesting right now.
Yeah, that was the first, as soon as kind of everything changed.
Yeah.
One of the first things that I started doing is I shifted my perspective and I said, look, I'm going to have to get good at this virtual thing.
Right.
Presenting virtually, teaching virtually,
right.
Doing all of that stuff.
Right.
And I figured, just with everything else in my life, that the only way I'm going to get better at it is by continually doing it.
Right.
And so I started saying yes to almost everything. Mm-hmm. And what ended up happening was basically over the summer, the American summer, so
right.
May to like August,
right.
I did more than 100 events.
Wow.
So I did a ton.
You're used to being at events in person, but how many do you do in a year usually?
So in person, before the pandemic, I was doing between 40 and 50 live events a year.
Right. Wow.
But that requires you getting on a plane and, usually, right. and going somewhere. And so that's a lot of travel.
Yes.
If you're doing it from home and generally they're a little bit shorter, I mean, you can do them much more quickly. And so not only was I doing a lot of those virtual talks, I mean, I did a virtual session at South by Southwest. I did like a couple of other higher profile ones, the virtual South by Southwest that they used to replace the actual one, which I know we were going to hang out at. And so we still owe each other a beer from that.
Right. Exactly.
We'll make happen at some point.
Yep.
But beyond that, I was also I was experimenting with different formats, right? I was, instead of just me solo talking, I was doing interviews where I would interview someone or someone would interview me, and we would do it more interactively, or we would use breakout rooms, or we would do all of this stuff, all of these different things.
Right.
And the question I would get all the time is, look, you published a book about trends. It's so-called Megatrends, it's 2020. It's supposed to, because I said, I'm not going to do this book anymore. Right. I wanted it to be a 10-year project, like as I said. So this was the last version. And I announced that kind of before the pandemic. That was sort of last year I announced this is going to be the last one.
Right.
And so my lens for Megatrends was not just a year. It was meant to be a decade. Right. And now the pandemic hits 2 months after this book comes out that's supposed to be about the next decade. And of course, everyone's like, look, is this still right? Is this correct?
Right. Yeah, because like everyone's patterns have changed. The stuff we're doing has changed. Yeah,
totally. Yep. And so it really caused me to do some soul searching, right? And not only soul searching, but more research. I mean, I went back in, I started looking at the stories, and they're pretty deeply researched already in terms of every one of these mega trends not only has other trends from the past, but has probably 30, 40, 50 stories behind it. So if you search through the index and the kind of list of resources, I mean, we stopped printing it in the book because it would just take too many pages.
Right. It's amazing.
Now you have to go online to actually read all the sources, right?
It goes back to that process though, right? That haystack
totally. Yeah, totally. And what I started to find is that some trends accelerated faster because of what's happened with the pandemic. And what I started talking about was, well, why has this happened? And part of the reason why it's happened is that we never lacked the ability to be innovative, I don't think. What we lacked was a way of breaking down the barriers to innovation. And what's happened because of the pandemic is many of those barriers have been forced to have been broken down. So it's almost like, you know, the water was at the dam, and then there became a crack in the dam, and all of a sudden it's like now that crack's turned into like the water's just flowing.
Right.
And what has ended up happening is things that we anticipated would take much longer to get to the point that they are now, such as online education,
Hmm.
have happened much faster because all of our kids are doing online education and virtual schooling.
Right.
And so those sorts of shifts are changing the way that we are used to getting products and services delivered to us, the business model of subscribing to things instead of owning them,
Hmm.
the idea that we can learn remotely from anywhere and from anyone, and faster. I mean, these are all factored into some of these mega trends that I had written about. And so
Right.
that's what ends up happening with many of them. They don't actually go away. They have either remained
Hmm.
or accelerated much faster than I thought they would.
That makes sense. Are there, so I don't want to go through all 10 of them because just because of time, and I wanted to hone in on the maybe 3 or 4 that you think are the most important, to kind of think about right now, as a bunch of innovators that are watching and listening, might be able to hone in and learn something from.
Yeah, so let's talk about from a startup point of view, right? Like,
Sure.
what are the ones that would perhaps be most impactful for
Right.
anybody who's a startup founder or an entrepreneur to think about?
Yeah.
One of them that I wrote about was really has two parts to it, and I called it Flux Commerce.
Okay.
And Flux Commerce was a mega trend that described, number one, the idea that the business model behind how we make money is starting to shift. So the
Hmm.
simplified example is things that we used to buy, we now subscribe to, right?
Right.
But there's more versions of that. There's trade and barter type economies that are now coming in.
Mhm.
There's the sharing economy, which has evolved to the next stage, which is, who even owns this stuff in the first place, and do we even need that?
Right.
That's one side of it. The other side of it is what I called the industry blur, which is we used to have verticals. It was like I was in financial services, you were in healthcare, you were in
Mhm.
travel, and now the lines are blurring between those things, right? I mean, you have
Right.
medical tourism, you have coffee shops that are owned by banks, you have Taco Bell opening up a hotel, you have
Right.
Crayon making makeup.
Hmm.
All of these are examples of companies that used to be in one vertical saying, look, I'm going to go into this other vertical because like that's an opportunity for me and I don't need to stick in this single solo vertical anymore. And so this diversification idea behind
Hmm.
business is a really important one, I think, for entrepreneurs to think about, and it's
Right.
been really important for me to think about too, because I mean, as we talked about before before the pandemic, I was doing 50 events a year and getting paid to speak at those, and that's a lot of income that's
Yeah.
basically gone away.
Right.
And I know a lot of my friends, good friends and fellow speakers have really struggled because that was their income.
Right.
And for me as an entrepreneur, I had a second business, and my other business is a book publishing company.
Yes.
And even though the speaking has gone away, the book publishing has actually accelerated because more people like me are saying, look, I can't speak right now, so I'm going to accelerate my process for writing my next book.
Yeah. Do you want to
And
talk a little bit about that publishing company? Because I mean, you're doing multiple things. You're literally doing 2 or 3 jobs.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it is diversification. It's entrepreneurial
Right.
diversification as opposed to
Right.
financial diversification, right? So like we all hear about like you shouldn't put all your money in stocks, you shouldn't put all your money in this one thing, right? We should move our money around, and we
Right.
generally, I mean, smart people generally know that.
Right.
But we don't tend to think about our entrepreneurial ventures the same way, right? We're all in. Like there's
Right.
a lot of romanticism attached to like I'm an entrepreneur and I'm working at this thing for like X number of hours to get it off the ground because like that's what entrepreneurs do, and we
Right.
live and breathe it.
Hmm.
And we sort of dismiss those who have a little bit over here and a little bit over there as being unfocused.
Right.
And if we shifted the perspective a little bit to say they're diversified, it
Right.
actually turns out to be pretty useful when a
Makes a lot of
pandemic
sense.
hits or
Yeah.
something like that, right?
Right. Yeah. No,
Um,
totally.
and for me, the publishing company was sort of a labor of love that I accidentally created. So
Mhm.
I had published my first 2 books with large New York publishers, and I was dissatisfied with the level of control. And like an entrepreneur, I mean, look, if anybody who's sold a book, I mean, you know this, like anybody
Yep.
who's sold a book to a publisher and then written it and gotten an advance, I mean,
Yep.
when you do that, you take money from the publisher, which means you become the employee and they're
Right.
the employer and you're writing the book for them.
Right.
So anybody who's entrepreneurial and has not worked for anyone for a long time, and now all of a sudden they do their book and they become an employee and they're treated like an employee, that sucks. They don't
Yeah.
like it.
Right.
And so I built this publishing company to flip it around. And it's I didn't invent the industry. I mean, this
Right.
industry already exists. It's called hybrid publishing. What it essentially means is you pay the publisher, and the publisher provides, hopefully, if they're good, they provide expert services to help you create a great book, print a great book, and distribute it to bookstores and online and everywhere. And that model had already existed, but nobody was doing it at the level that I wanted to do it, which was, for a New York Times bestselling author of a business book to get what they actually need. So these are not, self-published books that are printed on demand or shipped off to China. These are beautiful books.
Yep.
And that's what I wanted to do, because I'm a brand guy, right? Like I want something that is beautiful looking, that's beautifully branded, and that I could put out there and say, look, I've worked for a year or 2 or 3 on this thing and I'm proud of it.
Right.
And that didn't really exist. And so that was the opportunity, right? But that's what diversification let me do. So now that the pandemic hit and the speaking's gone away, I've spent more time focused on that.
That makes sense.
Camera check. Go ahead and do the camera button.
Camera button. All right. Let's dive back into some of those mega trends. So you mentioned one, the flux commerce. Let's talk about any others that pop out that startups or entrepreneurs should be thinking about right now.
Yeah, there's another one that sort of alludes to something I spoke about earlier, which is education. But the mega trend I wrote about was instant knowledge.
Right.
And there's a couple of components to this, and it's driven by this human belief that we can learn anything faster because we have access to all these tools at our fingertips. And part of the story, one of the stories that inspired this mega trend was me reading about an 8-year-old who had the munchies in the evening and decided to teach himself how to drive on YouTube so he could drive to McDonald's and go through the drive-through, which is like
sounds
terrifying.
Dangerous.
As father, right? Like that probably terrifies you too.
Yes.
But it was interesting because like here's this 8-year-old who's like, I can teach myself how to drive on YouTube, right? And like 10 years from now, what's that 8-year-old going to say about the college question, right? I mean, when he has that conversation, does he need to go to college? Like, and I think that it's a double-edged sword, right? Because just because we have knowledge at our fingertips doesn't mean we have mastery or wisdom. And to some degree, it diminishes that because it's hard to master something by watching a YouTube video. But at the same time, if we have all this information at our fingertips, like we have the ability to figure anything out faster. So like even with the pandemic, I've just been watching videos about like switchers and audio and cameras and how to get this, the blurry background, and like that's all YouTube videos. I didn't do a course on any of that stuff. I didn't do film production. I just tried to figure it out. And this mentality that we can just figure stuff out is leading to lots of opportunity. I mean, for us, one of the reasons why with the Non-Obvious company, like one of the reasons why I didn't choose to do the trend book anymore is because I wanted to shift the perspective of the company away from just doing the trend reports to providing useful insights. And so we built out something that we called the Non-Obvious Guide series, which is a series of guidebooks that are meant to compete with the Dummies guides.
Gotcha.
And the whole tagline behind those is that it's smart advice for smart people, because you're not an idiot, you're not a dummy. You expect to figure this stuff out. And those books were created in the 90s for a different mentality. And people don't have that mentality anymore. And so why are we still reading these 400-page useless books?
It's interesting you bring that up. We spoke with Mike Evans, who's the co-founder of Grubhub recently, earlier today. And he basically talked about how he got the Sales for Dummies book, and that's what taught him to go out and it actually did help him get his first sale, through learning that. But you're right, those have not been, that was 15 years ago. Probably that our book was probably written 20 years ago.
Yeah, so, and the thing is, I'm sure that that he got it because there was nothing else.
Right.
And so, it's sort of like finding that diamond piece of advice in the middle of crap. I picked up lots of these Dummies guys when I was doing research, and one of them, I remember I picked up one on internet marketing, and it had an entire page defining what a friend is. Like, does anyone need that? No, that's why those guides are 400 pages long. So like, maybe you'll find the 17 pages that are actually useful, but you got to dig through 400 pages to do it. And who wants to do that?
Right.
Literally no one.
You've put out some of those guides. You put one right after the pandemic kind of hit around virtual meetings, right? So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I did the Non-Obvious guide basically to like working virtually, and it was everything that I had learned in the last decade of working remotely myself, because my office is in my house. I'm used to doing that. But also, like, what does it take to be effective in virtual meetings? How do you avoid that Zoom fatigue? How
Right.
do you lead a virtual team? Because most of the teams that I work with and the freelancers that I work with on the publishing side or otherwise, now, a lot of times we haven't met in person, but we
Right.
collaborate, and we collaborate all the time. And so, how
Right.
do you do that effectively? These were questions that were urgent for people, and
Right.
and I remember it was the weekend that South by Southwest got canceled. It was like the
Right.
middle of March,
Right.
and that was when I decided I was going to write this book. And
Mhm.
I spent the next 4 or 5 weeks doing interviews and research,
Mhm.
and then I wrote the book in 4 weeks after that.
Wow.
And part of it's, yes, I'm a fast writer, but I spent an equivalent amount of time researching and interviewing
Mhm.
as I did writing, because the more time I spent up front doing that, the faster the writing was on the back end.
Right. But that's pretty phenomenally fast. Like most publishers
Yeah.
would not be able to get something out that quick ever. Right. So
Yeah, I mean, we did all that, and then we got the book out in late May, early June.
Right.
And so, yeah, so that's one of the benefits of owning the whole ecosystem, right? I
Right.
know how it works. I know how quickly I can get stuff done. I know who I can lean on
Right.
to say, hey, just, jump this to the top of the queue because I've given you $1 million worth of printing jobs in the, past 2 years. And,
Right.
so like I do have the ability to maybe accelerate stuff more than anyone else would.
Mhm.
But also it was just this idea that I had figured some stuff out because I had to. And
Mhm.
if I could put it into a book form that would be useful for people, and eventually into an online training, which is what we're working on right now,
Mhm.
that would be of benefit for people.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to get it out of my head. And also, like, my response to being grounded at home
Right.
was to start writing, because I'm a
Yep.
writer.
You got all this
I've always
time
been a
back.
writer.
You don't have to
Yeah.
travel. Right.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So like you can't do that. And
Right.
and it's amazing as a publisher, I will tell you this, and I think you know this, that the number of people who have written and published a book who hate writing
Mhm.
is surprisingly high.
Mhm.
And it's tough because there are people who have amazing ideas, but they're not writers.
Right.
And for me, look, I'm an English major. I did a master's degree in English. Like, I've always been a writer. And so that has helped me in many different ways. And when it comes to getting a book out this quickly, it's definitely been beneficial because I can sit down and I can write relatively quickly, and I can write on a deadline, which is basically what real writers do. I mean, journalists, they always write on a deadline.
Right. That makes sense. Okay. Let's dive back into maybe one more mega trend that you think might be helpful. And then maybe if we have a little more time, I want to talk about, well, that actually might eat it up. So let's just dive into one more mega trend.
Okay.
Which one do you want to talk about?
Let's talk about one that a lot of people have asked about. Probably one of the most popular megatrends.
Sure. Yep.
And it was something I called revivalism.
Mhm.
And revivalism was an observation of the fact that the more, and then remember, this was written before the pandemic,
Right.
but it became even more relevant because of the pandemic. So before the pandemic, there was already, people were kind of calling it the tech backlash, right?
Right.
The idea that we wanted to get away from our devices. We just wanted some alone time. We wanted some me time. We wanted to go off in the woods and
Right.
not always be connected with the beeping and the dings and the alerts
Right.
and all of that stuff.
Right.
And so we started rediscovering things that made us nostalgic for the past. TV shows were coming back. Sir Patrick Stewart went back to playing Picard. We were listening to vinyl music again. We were playing
Right.
board games again.
Mhm.
All of that stuff was already happening because of the pandemic. And then we got stuck at home. And now all of a sudden people are puzzling. They're buying puzzles at home.
Right. I did a couple puzzles here. Yeah. Probably
I
three
mean,
or four.
we always have a puzzle sitting there right now.
Yep.
And even more so, we kind of went backwards in time, and the macro vision behind this megatrend, right? So beyond just kind of the stuff like reconnecting with the old stuff that we remember, the macro reason for it is because in many ways we feel like the world right now is just not trustworthy. We're always being lied to. The politicians are lying to us. The news is lying to us. We feel under assault by lies.
Right. You call that trend untruthing, right? Or truth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, truthing was like one of the past trends. And it was this idea that and that was actually part of the revivalism megatrend.
Right.
And the idea behind that was, good memory, by the way. The idea behind truthing is if we don't know what to trust, we retreat into our own beliefs and we trust what we already know or what we remember.
What you feel comfortable with.
What you feel comfortable with.
Some uses
why nostalgia became such a big force, right? Because we turn backwards and we always see the past as having been much more trustworthy than now.
And the funny part is our memory goes as we get older. So is that really what it was like, or is,
Well, that is something, right? Because I can choose. I have this beautiful luxury that my kids don't have of choosing to remember myself as way more awesome in high school than I actually was.
right?
Whereas,
There's no
our
photos
kids
or
have,
video of that. Like there's
yeah,
nothing,
they have
right?
videos and proof and
Yeah,
like all of this stuff. So they have to
right,
remember themselves exactly the way they were because like
right,
there's the evidence, right? I don't
right,
have any. You don't have any pictures of
right,
me from high school, right?
right.
So like you don't
Yeah.
have any evidence. I
We're,
can
and
tell
I
you
always,
anything.
yeah, no, we always to say, listen, it's probably a good thing we didn't have that stuff, especially in college and some of those other times when you're like, wow, it's got to be really tough, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, and you'll find the occasional photo that like an old college buddy posts
Right.
online, and you're like, "Ooh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
maybe don't tag me in that one."
Exactly. All right, cool. So going back to that, so how can we think about that as you're building out technology or startups? What
Yeah,
type
so one of the very practical ways to think about this revivalism is
of,
something that I used to call the downgraded mode.
mm,
So, for example, my phone, I'm not an Apple guy, so I have a Samsung phone.
yep,
And since I got my phone, there's always been a low battery kind of option on the phone. So, for
right,
example, if I'm down to 5% battery life,
yep,
I can go into low power mode, and low power mode disables all of the
everything,
colors, all of the kind of stuff that goes on in the background,
yep.
and it basically just allows me to do phone calls, texting, and at that time they had Facebook because apparently that's mission critical.
Wait, I love that. That's a great hack. My phone has something similar, and my watch does too. And I've been thinking this whole time, should I get a light phone or one of these other minimalistic phones? All I need to do is find the button.
Yeah,
Sounds like,
that's right. Yeah, just go to low power mode and it'll literally change the view, and it just gives you like four
yep,
things, and it's all in like a duotone, so there's no
right,
color. And
right,
now your 5% battery life will last for another 17 hours.
right.
And I think that that's the downgraded mode.
Hmm.
And I think that as we build technology, we forget about that mode. We don't build that in. We don't give people that option to just get the basics.
Yeah,
And we could. And sometimes that would be the optimal way to do something. Like we overthink stuff, and we like, I mean, my car, like I have two cars. One is a 12-year-old car, and the other one is like a 5-year-old car. And the
hmm,
5-year-old car has one of those keys that you take the key into the car and then you press the button. It's like a push button start. And
right,
I always lose the keys and I have nowhere to put them.
right.
My old car, my 12-year-old car, has an actual key that you actually put in and you turn it, and I never lose those keys.
No, yeah,
And so like,
right,
why did we need that push button thing? We didn't. Like, I actually enjoy taking a key and sticking it in the car, and I don't
right,
even know if they make cars like that anymore, right?
right. Yep.
And so like, there's a downgraded option right there. Like, I would choose, if I had a choice, I would choose the key that I could stick into the car and turn to turn it
Right.
on, because
Yep.
I wouldn't lose that.
No, yeah, that's a great point. I mean, even with like travel and airports, I haven't been doing as much of that, but I always print out my ticket because I want to have the paper ticket
Yeah,
so that I don't get to
I
that
know, me too.
that, that checkpoint and then my phone doesn't work and I can't get in and they send me to the back or something. Like
Yep.
you always
Yep.
have that backup. And so I definitely understand that. That's definitely a good one to remember and think about as people are building things. So this has been really, really interesting. You just are a wealth of information and knowledge, and I really appreciate you joining us today. Where can people connect with you if they wanted to find you?
So the easiest are two things. One is I publish a newsletter every Thursday, which is the most interesting and non-obvious stories of the week. And I spend hours every week
Yeah,
curating that and trying to
really
find the
good,
most
by the way.
interesting stories. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So you can subscribe to that just by going to nonobvious.com/subscribe.
Hmm.
And the other thing is every week I do a video show, the Non-Obvious Insights show, where I interview someone different
Hmm.
about something that they're working on. And so I've had some amazing guests so far. I've had Dan Pink, Guy Kawasaki, Francesca Gino,
Wow.
Mark Atunis, Tom Fishburne. I mean, amazing guests. And I'll continue to do that. And that's on YouTube. So if you just go to youtube.com/Rohit Bhargava, that's my name. That's my channel. Every Thursday at noon Eastern, I do a live version of that show.
Wow. Every Thursday, noon Eastern, go subscribe so you can get the updates and you can follow along the newsletter as well. Some great articles are shared in things that are going to probably bubble up to be the next mega trends, but obviously you're not doing that book anymore. So we got to follow the newsletter. So that's the way we'll find it. For those of you that haven't yet, check out this book. It's out there. You can go get it, get a real physical copy, or there's a bunch of different ways to get it as well. And those of you that are watching and being a part of the conversation on Twitter, we appreciate it. Remember, if you're still thinking about putting something out there, you can use Startup of Year, the hashtag Startup of Year, and the other hashtag Non-Obvious. And we'll be giving away some books to some of our favorite tweets that are part of the conversation. So Rohit, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it. You got some great stuff going on, and I really love watching what you've been up to over the last decade plus. Stay well, of course, and obviously always be non-obvious.
That's right. You got it. That's the tagline. So thank you so much for having me.
Yep. Thank you.